Hey everybody, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI and join the club. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at substack.com/@Jeremy. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net and you can pick up my books there. Okay. So today we are doing something a little different. We're going back to some traditional artwork. Haven't done traditional work in a while. And I am still sorting out my my physical drawing setup. I see Herman's in the chat already. Whoa, what's good, G and people? It's all good here. Trying to sort out my physical drawing setup. Previously, my drawing table used to be an angled desk, whereas now I've got like two different desks, two different workstations, and now I'm working with a lap board. So I'm going to try. Previously, I was working facing the opposite direction and having this lap board on an easel. That did not seem to work out as well for me, just ergonomically, physically. So as you can see, I've got, this lap board here. Got a little sport cam right here pointing at my drawing board. And it is quite zoomed in. And, I was trying to get all of this set up before starting the stream. But I honestly think that seeing things like how an artist sets up their workstation, both for good and for ill, when things are going well and as well as when things are like not quite cooperating, I think that that's useful. Like, I am interested in how other artists set up their what their live streaming setups are so that they can actually draw and see at the same time, because that's the biggest problem I tend to have is I either am blocking the work or I'm too far away. It's like I have to usually choose between having a good view for myself or having a good view for you guys. And I have not found the perfect compromise yet. And I see Gary Hodges in the chat. Buddy Gary Hodges, how you doing, man? Happy Sunday. See you too, dude. So this time I was trying to see what happens if I have my camera extremely close. And I'm just trying to sort out. I think I may have it just a hair too close. Now, part of this, what's making this a little bit challenging is that the artwork itself is a small piece of artwork. This is a Strathmore smooth surface artist trading card. So these are very, very small. Like, you can see how big my thumb is in comparison. So this is a small ass piece of artwork. And in fact, this is not even what I originally was planning to do today. Originally, I was going to do start a fresh sketch card of Storm from the X-Men. However, I happened to notice that I had this unfinished piece. And I thought, well, why don't I finish the piece? So that's what we're going to do. And Herman asks, traditional drawing or inking for this image? And that is a good question. I think I'm going to try inking it because I've gone back and forth. My buddy Carl Altstetter often says that I pencil with a feather and then I ink with a chainsaw, which is meant to be both compliment and and corrective, or just compliment slash powerful commentary or suggestion. But I've got some that I've already completed. Like I've got a Wolverine that I did here. And this one, you know, obviously it's all pencil and colored pencil. I did a couple of different Wonder Womans, and I was not really, this one I think had the face I was the happiest with. I had another one with a face that I was less happy with. And this one that's kind of in between. So I was planning to kind of do the same thing with Storm, just keep drawing her until I get a face that I really like. These are some that I really enjoyed, this idea of a Joker Wolverine mashup. I did one that was like a headshot and actually do it like a playing card. And I did one that is a little bit, that's more of a bust. And I realized for trading cards, you really can't do a bust. I mean, you can, but it's hard. There's just not enough room for a, let me put it this way. A bust that stops just kind of at the mid torso, you could probably do. But doing a bust like that, like doing a shot that's like a half shot that goes all the way down to the waist, you just out too far out. This one, I think, is a pretty good shot. And I'm not sure what it was that made me draw this one and then say, oh, I'm going to do another one immediately afterwards. But for some reason, I just was not 100% happy with this one. I think it's because I didn't use a different pen for the mouth features. I should have used a different size brush pen or inking device for the facial features, because the line is just too bulky. Even though it's a brush pen and it has line variance to it, overall it just feels too chunky. So I'm going to come in here and tighten up these pencils just a tiny bit more. Let's see. Now, the other thing that's interesting here is I am going to have to make a concerted effort to turn and check the chat every few minutes, because unlike when I'm drawing on my tablet, normally I see every time there's a comment, and out of the corner of my eyes, I'll see a little bit of movement. Whereas with this, I'm completely facing away from you guys. All right. And again, this camera is just sort of slightly in my face. Let me tweak this a little bit more and see if I can just position this just slightly off to the side a little bit more so it's not quite blocking my view. Let's see here. Herman says, does your style tend to change a lot? He said those Wonder Woman looked as if very different artists. I don't know if I have a style, more like I'm pulling from what I like in memory over the years. Well, that's a very good question. Yes, my style changes a lot. My biggest problem, well, I have many problems as an artist, and I don't say that to be like boohoo or I'm fishing for compliments. It's just a true statement. I have a lot of flaws in my craft, and the biggest one is that I am inconsistent, which does not particularly make me suited for superhero comics. Staying on model is something that I have quite a bit of difficulty with. So when you talk about my style changes, it's not so much that it's a stylistic change or that it's even intentional. It is simply that my ability to maintain consistency of a character look it's limited. It's something that I do want to work on. and gain a better sense of consistency. But at the same time, my biggest influences are artists. I think one of the reasons why I love somebody like Bill Sienkiewicz so much is because he can take the exact same character and render them as an animated character, an oil painting, a traditional superhero Neil Adamsy look, and then a photorealistic ink rendering. He's extremely capable of doing characters in very versatile styles, yet all of them still feeling like his work. So I am a bit torn in terms of what I actually want. Do I want to be able to have a repeatable, consistent looking style? When I say that, I'm thinking more of somebody. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. I'm thinking somebody like Brian Stelfreeze. Brian Stelfreeze, when he does his paintings, they are consistent in terms of their style and execution. They're very different, not very different because it's the same artist, but the rendering is very different from his sequential comic book work, but also both are consistent. So he has two different styles, both of which consistent. And I don't know if I want that or whether I want to be somebody who's sort of transformative and every piece looks a little bit different, but still has something that says me about it. But that goes directly to your comment that these pieces all seem like they're drawn by different artists. And that's only cool if it's intentional. If you are an artist who is in control of their craft and making that choice, that's dope. If you lack control, which I do, then it is a flaw to be overcome. It's another skill that I need to master. Let's see here. Byron's in the chat. Hey, Byron. How you doing? Good to see you. Herman says, you tend to make model sheets to call back on. It's definitely important when animating. So I try to come up with shapes to make it easier for me to remember. Well, you know what? I did that with my last comic book, Morningstar. I did make model sheets. And to be honest, I think that is a good exercise. In fact, I'm going to make a little note. Instead of having my house littered with notepads, instead of having my desk littered with Post-it notes, I decided instead I just bought a small little memo pad. I bought like a 12 pack of these. It was like $10 for a 12 pack. At any office supply store. And instead of just covering my house with Post-its, I'm just going to use this now to write stuff down. And yeah, it's not like model sheets are a new idea to me, but I need to be more consistent about it. And I think that model sheets are actually a really good exercise for character development and character design. Writing down both character development and design. Yeah, because I've made sort of half-assed model sheets for the new comic book that I'm working on, but I've never really done consistent, like really dynamic-looking model sheets that look like what you would find in an art of book. And I think it would be a helpful exercise for myself to push to do that level of detail, to really knock out consistency. And that's something, Gary, if you're still in the chat, I am curious whether you use model sheets or not? Because obviously you use a lot of photo reference, you work with models, you cast your comic books, but I'm curious whether you make model sheets or not, because that's you are very good at maintaining a consistent look. I would say that my books, my characters tend to evolve and change over time. I'm very loosey-goosey about it. And if I were being kind to myself, I would say I'm organic. But the truth is just I don't take the time to really beef up that level of consistency. And I think that I should. But yes, model sheets, breaking your character down into simple shapes, repeatable shapes. I think that that's very, very useful. In fact, I've often thought to myself, this is something that doesn't necessarily work if you're drawing a comic book issue by issue. But if you were drawing an entire graphic novel, like I did with my first book, Eye of the Gods, I feel like it is a beneficial idea, or at least it would help me to thumbnail the entire book out so that I see the poses that I need. I see what I need the character's costume to do, and then do the model sheets after I've already basically worked out the whole story. Because often I find that even if I were to do model sheets ahead of time, the character changes in the drawing of the story. I just find that there's different things that I need the character to do, different poses, different scenes. Their costume, I'm like, oh, I actually need to have a belt. I need the belt to be higher. Or, wow, this character would have worked much better if I had put them in suspenders instead of a belt. This cape needs to be shorter. This cape needs to be longer. Not that I do superhero comics, but regardless, in the process of the making of whatever book or project I'm working on, I frequently discover what it is that I should have done. Let's see here. So let's see here. So Gary commented, he said, for some characters, yes. I do model sheets. They're very rough, but enough for me to remember where buttons or stitching or stuff is to be consistent. Yeah, and that's my main point is, as I am inconsistent. I mean, when I hear people give like Rob Liefeld grief for having dozens of patches, but then changing parts of the costume in mid-issue, I find it hard to hate on him for that because I do the same shit. I mean, first off, I actually genuinely like Rob Liefeld's art. Shush, Peanut Gallery. But in addition to that, I think that there's something like when you've got people that are working on monthly comics and they're just jamming through at light speed. I mean, there's a reason why classic superhero costumes are so simple. It's to make it something where you really just have to draw a guy in long underwear and then remember what symbol goes on their chest. That simplifies a lot of stuff. Let's see here. James is in the chat. Good to see you, James. Thanks for dropping in, hanging out. Gary mentions, I also have made things in SketchUp to serve that purpose, usually alien technology. You know, and I will tell you, I have been tempted to fall down the 3D rabbit hole and really want to, you know, figure out how to design character, you know, all sorts of things, vehicles, costumes, cities in 3D. But I feel like I would spend so much time doing that it's like, oh, it's yes, it is a whole art form unto itself, but I might just not even be making comics and just spend all my time just being a 3D artist, which I think that hell probably make a better living doing that than doing comics. There is an artist who I subscribe to on Patreon, Stepan Sejic. And he's done a lot of stuff for Top Cow. He's done a lot of stuff for DC. I think he got into ZBrush a few years back, and he shares a lot of the 3D work that he does, designing his characters on his Patreon. And I think for when he does Kickstarters for his comics, he'll make 3D models as a reward where people can download the files and print them themselves. And it's one of those things, like when I have friends who are both artists, visual artists and musicians, and I'm like, screw you for having so much damn talent. I'm looking at you, Jim Lujan. But also, when I look at somebody who does 3D, and actually my buddy Jesse Tovis, his main job is as a visual effects artist. And yet he does, so he works in 3D, both animating, modeling, lighting, like he can do it all. And also he plays guitar. So that's another one. I am envious because I can only do one thing and I don't do it as well as I would like to. And I decided here, I'm trying to decide compositionally, I want to sort of frame her upper body in all black. So I'm going in here and I'm trying to figure out, a lot of times you'll do a sketch like this and you won't necessarily spot blacks. You'll just figure out what you're going to do with the shadows as you go. But for something like this, where if I'm going to black out the whole top half of the piece, I need to figure out where my lights and darks are going to be. Let's see here. So Byron mentions character design is something I need to focus on more. I feel like my technical skills are more than fine at this point, but making interesting original characters and characters is a huge weakness. Well, but that's the beauty of it. I feel like some people write comics. Writers will often write comics so they can draw the shit that they really enjoy. I, in my insanity, write things to challenge me. I literally look at what am I bad at and then try to write things that will force me to work on those things. I mean, I drew an entire Western and I'm still not as good at horses as I would like to be. But that was part of the impetus of Morningstar. I think in every project I do, I try to put something in there that's going to push me and challenge me. So I'm right there with you, Byron. I'm like, go for it. Put stuff in there that's hard to do. And Byron says, Rob's art is fun, to be fair. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like I used to listen to his Robservations podcast, and he definitely mentions how Jack Kirby is a huge influence on him. And I think that regardless of people who love or have disdain for Rob's art, what comes across in his work is energy. And once I understood how big of an influence Kirby was on him and is on him, that really gave me insight into why I gravitated to his work as a young man, and what I think fans in the modern era still find about his work, because his work does not look like Jack Kirby, but Rob's not afraid to distort the figure for the sake of energy. That's all what he's trying to get on every single page is force and dynamics and a sense that the page is barely even able to contain the drawing. And I think that the criticisms people have about his draftsmanship, they're missing the fact that he's willing to sacrifice anatomy and certain aspects of draftsmanship in pursuit of energy above all. Like the energy is the primary high watermark that he's pursuing in his work. And hey, Dylan is in the chat. Hello, Dylan. Good to see you. Happy Sunday. Herman says, right. I just installed Blender 2.79. The newest version is too strong for my computer, but I think they're on 4.0 or something. I'm trying to get into character sculpting, environments, assets. It says, and Grease Pencil is in Blender. You can do 2D animations and sketch and paint in it. It's a very nice but very hard program. Yeah, I think that the only thing that keeps me from pursuing it is that I feel like I have so many other things that I'm actively chasing now that I'm like, do I really want to add something else? Do I want to add another log on that fire pile there? Gary says, I had to learn SketchUp for my day job, and it's turned out to be really handy for modeling references for comics. Now, see, I think that is one of the best situations to be in when you are getting paid to learn. In fact, I honestly feel like the biggest thing that's, now we're going off on a tangent here, but I feel like the biggest thing that's broken with our education system is not enough internships. Because I feel like all you really need is high school and then just go work at jobs. Just go to places, learn from them, see how everything that I use in my day job and in my paying work, I learned on the job. I didn't learn in classrooms. My class work got me those original jobs because my very first art job, besides working for the school newspaper, my actual first professional art job was I got that job because a small company was looking for concept artists, and they came to my drawing professor and he asked if they had any students that would be a good fit. He nominated me. I went down, I interviewed, I got the job. And the best thing is I couldn't fit that job in around my work schedule while I was also running track. So what they did was they were willing to sign a paper saying that it was an internship. Even it was a paid internship. It was really my job, but as a salary, the salary that I was getting was was quote unquote my stipend as an intern. So that way I could just use my credits, my school credits for a class, and I could end up missing class and just going to work. That was fantastic. Hang on, I gotta move for a second so that I can grab a what are those things? A triangle. Now see, this is the beautiful thing. Now that I've got this lap board here, I can just take this. As far as you guys know, you don't see anything. My drawing board isn't moving at all. I'm setting it down on the floor. You guys have the same view. I can get up, move around the office. All right. I mean, I have to say, there's upsides and downsides to the setup that I have currently. I need to remember to keep facing the mic while I'm talking. There's ups and downs to the setup I have currently. But I think being able to get up and move around and have this freedom while I'm working is actually a good thing. I am probably going to have to figure out what I'm going to rest my drawing board against while I work. But unto itself, this is actually pretty good. So let's see here. Let's see here. James comment, I'm going to get to yours in a second. Yours is the one that made me laugh. But first, Herman says, I came up with a story that is in modern times. So it's going to force me to draw cars, guns, buildings, people with up-to-date modern clothes. So yeah, everything that scares me artistically. Well, but I mean, that's actually much easier because in that case, you don't need model sheets, you need reference. And I would argue that reference is much easier to assemble than a model sheet. Because with reference, you can get 3D models. I mean, well, first off, I will gladly say it's worthwhile to spend, if it's something that's going to be in every single issue of your comic, then spending, however much, $20, $50 on like a 3D model from Turbo Squid. And I mean, I'm sure you can get models even cheaper than that, but buying a 3D model on Turbo Squid for a car that you're going to use or a building that's going to be in every single issue of a comic, that's an absolute worthwhile investment. Going in and buying some stock photography, so you've got all these images of something that's going to be in there. All of those things are worth it. And to me, that is a lot less time consuming than making model sheets. So I am a fan of that. I'm putting a border around the edge of Barbara's head because my plan compositionally is I'm going to make this whole region above her head. I'm going to black that out. You'll see, because I'm going to shade it in first just to make sure that compositionally this looks like what I want. So in the same way that down here I've got her in silhouette, this is all going to be blacked out, and then I need to figure out what I'm going to do with her mask or cowl, since I don't want it to completely go to black. But yeah, what James said, he said, yeah, Liefeld style isn't my cup of tea. Same goes for Kelly Jones. Though Jones' Batman doesn't have a unique look, that may take some time to grow on me. I think some styles are easier to appreciate than others. What made me laugh when I read that is because I loved me some Kelly Jones. So Kelly Jones, my first Batman artist was actually Marshall Rogers when I was a little kid. I remember reading, I think he drew the first Man-Bat story that I read, but late 70s, early 80s, Marshall Rogers was probably the first Batman comics I saw. However, when I started reading comics in high school, well, junior high to high school, I started reading Batman not long after Death in the Family, which I think was Jim Aparo. But leading up to and into the whole Nightfall, Breaking of the Bat stuff, like that was when I worked at a bookstore when I was in high school, and I was reading the stripped copies, the stripped returned Batman covers. That was when Kelly Jones was on the scene, and I loved me some Kelly Jones Batman. Still love me some Kelly Jones Batman. I don't know why I'm saying it like past tense. Still love that stuff. But yeah, that just made me laugh. Like in the fact that you're like, yeah, Rob's not your cup of tea. You're like, same with Kelly Jones. I'm like, oh, I love Kelly Jones. So at least I'm consistent in terms of my influences. But no, I can respect that they're an acquired taste. I think that I have an appreciation for distortion of the figure. In fact, I think because to a certain degree, I would say that I am not so much a cartoonist, but I'm an expressionist, meaning I am more often than not, what I'm trying to pursue in my work is the internal. And the drawing or painting is a physical manifestation of some sort of emotion or some sort of internal drive or conflict, and internal as external as expression of the internal. To me, that feels like that's the kind of thing that someone like Kelly Jones, like if you look at Gustav Klimt, he was an influence on Egon Schiele. And if you look at Egon Schiele's work, now we're getting into people, like if you were to say a cartoon or a comic book equivalent. Now, I have never heard Ted McKeever say that he was influenced by Egon Schiele. I've only heard a handful of interviews with him. But when I think of artists that I am influenced by, I am influenced by Egon Schiele, and I'm also influenced by Ted McKeever. And those are guys who, like, if you feel that Kelly Jones or Rob Liefeld's exaggerations are just a little bit outside of your style or comfort zone, I'm definitely curious, James, if you're familiar with Ted McKeever's work and what you think of it. My point is that I am all over them. That's one, again, going back to Bill Sienkiewicz, the reason why he is such a huge influence on me is because he takes it all in. There's no style or technique or media that he rejects. It's all just fodder for him to make magic with. That's what I love about Bill Sienkiewicz's work. My tastes, I obviously don't have that level of mastery, but my tastes are very, no, eclectic is the right word. It's not just that they're diverse. It's almost like I intentionally go and try to find weirder or more incongruent influences. It's not like you can draw a clear line and say, oh, these are Jeremy's influences. It's more like, here's the painters I like. Here's the abstract expressionists I like. Here's the excellent draftsmen I like. Here's the landscape painters I like. Here's the traditional comic book illustrators I like. Here's like the sci-fi concept artists I like. It's like, I'm sucking it all in. It's kind of crazy. Let's see here. Let me scroll back down because, again, as usual, I get my jaws flapping, and you guys are like, it's like I start missing out on the combo in the chat. Dylan says, "Are you guys talking about Rob Liefeld?" Well, yeah, I didn't mean to make it a dissertation or rant on the glories of Liefeld's work, but I definitely feel like he gets painted unfairly with a broad brush as being a bad artist or a hack artist. Now, mind you, caveat, I've met the man in person. I'm in no way a friend of his, but I've met him at conventions, and he's been very, very nice. And he seems to be both encouraging to his fellow comic artists and very humble towards his fans. And for all of the grief that he gets, every time that I've seen him or interacted with him, all I see is a dude who really loves comics and is grateful to be doing it. And to me, I find it hard to understand people hating somebody who just feels that way about comics. I'm like, that's kind of how we all feel. So that's all. So James says, I wouldn't say that Liefeld or Jones's work is bad, since that's subjective. They wouldn't be working if their work didn't make an impression on the people hiring them. And Herman says, dude, I'm going to work on a pencil, a hat, a wheel. It's not that bad. It's just learning the interface. Finding where things are at is not easy like 3D Max. I have more knowledge of. Now, see, that's interesting because I have not worked in 3D Max for multiple decades, but I did take a class in 3D modeling with 3D Studio Max. That's the only other program that I really spent any time learning. Although for work, kind of like how Gary mentioned that he had to learn SketchUp for work, I started learning a program called FreeCAD, which is it's more suited towards hard surface modeling for product design. So it's like an industrial design program where you're not working in pixels, you're working in millimeters and inches, and you're actually building like physical, objects that can be 3D printed or physically manufactured. See, this is weird because I'm trying to not make her waist too tiny because I think it's weird when you've got like female characters with tiny waists. Particularly when this woman is a crime fighter and is supposed to be badass. If anything, well, I mean, it makes sense that she would have a physique that is in line with, say, Dick Grayson's. Like they both would be equally strong and dynamic. Let's see here. Let me... What am I going to use? I'm not going to use Sharpies, I'll tell you that much. I have kind of a mishmash of inking tools here. I think that I'm going to need to catch up on the chat first and then go in here with ink, because if I'm jumping back and forth, I'm going to screw this up. I am, however, going to... Or actually, you know what? This is what I can do. If you guys can hold on a minute. Well, I mean, not hold on. Go ahead. Keep chatting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to frame this top part here. Then I'm going to fill it. And then I'm going to let it dry for a little bit before going in and doing the lower half. And while it's drying, I'm going to get caught up on the comments. How's that for an idea? By the way, do you guys feel like this angle where I've got the camera on the drawing is working, that you guys can see? Because that's always the difficulty I have when I'm drawing, is finding a position and angle that gives you guys a good view, but also gives me a good view. All right. Now, it occurs to me that my inks are in storage, and I actually probably should get one of my bottles of ink out so that I can do this properly. Now, I am not a person who works a lot on shape and silhouette, and I'm realizing that I need to correct that, because if I get the composition locked in well, I can actually do a lot of the heavy lifting, or let the silhouette of the figure do a lot of the heavy lifting. Yeah, this actually makes me want to, excuse me, this makes me want to break out my my brushes and my my Speedball Black Magic ink and do some brush inking instead of brush pen inking, because this ink is not waterproof. Not that I'm planning to go over this with watercolor, but it would be nice to have the option if I were working in India ink instead of fountain pen ink. But I intentionally fill these with fountain pen ink because these are watercolor brushes. And India ink will dry in them and clog the bristles, whereas fountain pen ink does not, because it is it's water soluble. So I kind of had to choose which one is more important to me. Now, in theory, since I'm working top to bottom, I don't have to stop working. I can just work on the lower half of the figure, but I will be less likely to smudge and smear if I just let that settle and dry. And I'm looking at this and I'm also saying I see a big glob of ink that is absolutely dying to run right here. I gotta come at it from the top and just touch it enough that the paper towels, or not paper towel, this tissue sucks up some of the ink, because it very much wants to, there's like a big bead of ink that wants to drip down the figure. And that would be bad. All right. So now, back to the chat. Let's see here. James mentions Jones, talking about Kelly Jones here. Jones' aesthetic kind of fits Venom, the madness. That's how I think about it. Now, see, I have read very few. In fact, the only Venom comics I have read was, I think, the original Lethal Protector miniseries. I don't think I've read any Venom comics after that. So, yeah, if there's a Kelly Jones Venom comic out there, I think that that's worth me picking up. Let's see here. Dylan says, true, James. And he also says, Herman, that's why director Robert Eggers likes to make his movie in older times. He hates it, talking about having the modern things in society, you know, the vehicles, the cars, the pencils, the houses, the modern day stuff. Herman says, it's this guy on YouTube that makes 3D environments, and he colors them like anime. So I have to get in touch with him and pick up some pointers. I forgot his name, but I think he uses Unreal also. You know, it's weird. I was just talking to somebody about Unreal Engine. Oh, there's a guy at my figure drawing workshop who works in video games. And we were talking about that. And I was asking him whether he works in Unreal or not. And he was telling me that the studio he works at uses a proprietary software. But yeah, I mean, I've often thought about that, learning Unreal just for making environments for my comics. And it does look straightforward, but at the same time, I'm spending so much time chasing all these other elements of art making and comic making. And so it feels like my brain just doesn't have the bandwidth to handle yet one more thing to learn. Herman says, yeah, I was into the Jim Aparo run, not the Azrael, but definitely gravitated to Kelly Jones Batman back in the day. Nice work. And James says, Ted McKeever, sounds familiar. Well, he was much more of a Vertigo guy than a mainstream superhero guy. Like, I think he did maybe a Tales of the Dark Knight. But most of the stuff that he did was either Vertigo or it was Indie Comics. He did a series way back in the original incarnation of Marvel's Epic Comics line. There's a series called Metropole that he did, and then he's got a character named Eddie Current that I think there's like three different characters that three different iterations that he appears in. But very much more of a of an expressionistic artist. Like it really is emotional drawing and conceptual drawing versus traditional draftsmanship. Let's see here. Dylan says, for me, my inspiration is Mignola, Topi, Van Gogh, and James Herron. Well, that is a murderer's row of influences. You know what's funny is I have not read enough James Herron comics. I haven't started Ultra Mega yet. It's available from my library, and I've been planning to read it that way. But I read some of his a long time ago. He did some of when Hellboy was going through a period where there were other artists both writing and drawing it. Or actually, no, it was Tales from the BPRD. I think that's what it was. And I had read, I think maybe a 2-part James Herron story or a 4-part James Herron story, and I was blown away by his work. Like it very much is in that Gary Gianni, Troy Nixie type vein of just detailed and supple and dynamic and creepy. Very much, love his work. Let's see here. And Byron says it's a common thing where people can't separate their subject tastes in a work from the person. They rather hate the man because they dislike the work than to have the nuance. It's an unfortunate human behavior. Yes, that is true. I completely agree. Wow, I'm so sorry. My voice is going. I'm going to mute for a second and just try to hack my lungs out and see if that will help. Let me just hit the... All right. Yeah, hopefully that will help a little bit. Let me get a little more coffee. Herman says, I'm sure he's getting some type of cut from the Deadpool movies, so I'm sure Liefeld's very happy. LOL, getting some of those billions. Yeah, hey, the man, he's a smart businessman. He ain't getting the okie doke. I'm glad. I'm hoping he's laughing himself all the way to the bank. Good for him. I would be lucky to have that level of, a tenth of his financial success. Let's see here. Amar in the chat. Good to see you, brother. Been using Blender since 2008, off and on. Been around 3D since 96. So you're old school. Yeah. Let's see here. Dylan is laughing at Herman agreeing about the Deadpool stuff. Now, Amar says he may not be a good illustrator, but he came along at the right time. Well, Amar, that's what we were talking about earlier, about how taste is subjective. And I, for one, I see in it what I'm a fan of his work, and I see in his work what it is that draws people to it. Let's see here. Let me scroll back a couple. Let's see here. Oh, Mighty Geek Studio says the angle is perfect. Oh, for the camera. Good. I'm happy to hear it. I always see this is the thing. I've never invested in a DSLR camera with a nice zoom lens, because in a perfect world, I would have it mounted in such a way that it just zooms in and it's perfect. Everything looks crystal clear. But I will tell you that I like having my camera mounted to my drawing board. So for those that came in late, here's my drawing board that's in my lap. My camera is clamped to the drawing board. So if you see in the little picture in the corner, it's clamped to the drawing board so that no matter how I move this, I don't have to worry about, like, I pick an area where I'm going to be working, get it nice and focused on that, and then it's good. I don't have to worry about me moving, shifting the drawing around, sliding out of frame. Now, it does box me in to a certain degree. This would be very challenging if I were working on a whole comic book page. I mean, I would have to zoom the camera out, so that basically would be like pressed against my chest if I were working on a whole comic book page taped down. But for small works, and even stuff that's maybe, you know, like a 8x10, this is, I think, a pretty good setup. So, let's see here. And Dylan agrees. Yeah, I think it's a good angle. Glad to hear that. Paul says, just got here. Paul Pate said, just got here. Lay that ink on thick. You know what, Paul? What's funny is you are in all the chats, because I was watching a pencil to pencil video and you were in the comments. You're always on the Artcasters, which is good. But it's like every time I'm watching a dope art video, I'm like, Paul's right there with those folks. Like, you are just Johnny on the spot, man. Paul's saying hi to everybody. Herman says, wow, you jumped in with the Fatty G. I'm used to people using like a 0.01 or a 1 to do outlines and then add the heavy lines. I always start with small lines and build up because I'm a scaredy cat and lazy. Well, I will tell you that, again, I have mentioned my boy, Carl Altstetter. So Carl, I mean, he's worked at Image. He has had his own company called Hyperworks. He's an experienced comic creator, and he shared a lot of his knowledge and experience with me. One of the things that he taught me about spotting blacks that I have not mastered, but I see the power of it. Ooh, I can just have this. Now, see, this is nice because I can start doing what, I don't know how much you guys are familiar with painting, but in painting, they talk about edges, and there's hard edges, which is when something is a hard surface and turns from one to the other. There's soft edges, which is when something is a rounded form. And then there's lost edges, where things kind of bleed in and out, or things just kind of disappear into the background. And I just realized that I can get a very nice lost edge simply by coming in here and letting the mask break the outline. So coming in this way and letting parts of her head, instead of having an outline that's separating her from the background, just let her disappear into the background in some places. But the thing, Herman, that you said about making the fatty fat lines, what Carl taught, one of the big things that he taught me, and he's taught me so many things. You know what? I'm going to come in here and do the next set of large black areas just as a to get to what to show what it is that I'm talking about, which is the idea that if you get your large areas of black in first, you actually don't have to do as much inking. Like if you come in and just get strong silhouettes of your character, it's almost like most of the drawing is really done. And this was something like, I think he just saw me working. And I think similar to you, Herman, I was kind of scaredy cat working my way around the figure. And that thing I said at the top of the stream, like Carl was the one who said, I pencil with a feather, but I ink with a chainsaw. He saw me going in and putting all this detail and working around the figure. And you're just like, dude, just go in, spot on in blacks, and then figure out what you need to make the drawing feel finished. And I realized I was putting way too much work into the drawing. And it's not a matter of being lazy. It's a matter of what does the drawing need in order to express what you're trying to say. And I really do believe that less is more. For instance, I mentioned all of those other influences of mine, the Egon Schiele, obviously Bill Sienkiewicz, various other painters. But in comics, honestly, I didn't come to Alex Toth until later in life. But Toth is one of those guys who he knows what the drawing needs, and he gives it that and nothing else. So the idea of going in here, Herman, and doing big chunky lines first is more about if those big chunky areas, the point is that the details aren't going to save you. That's why if you look at somebody like Bruce Timm, or also even though he was drawing, or Ty Templeton, from the Batman Adventure comics, I think Ty Templeton is a even better example because Bruce Timm stuff is simple in terms of it's simple character design, so it has to be animated. With Ty Templeton, working in comics, you can be more cartoony or less cartoony, but he was trying to capture that look and feel of the cartoon series. And I think that he's a really good example of what I'm talking about in terms of he figured out what it needed in any given comic and just did that and nothing else. Now, that's true, I think, of all comic artists in the sense that you got to be fast to hit a monthly deadline, which I am not. But I try to listen to those lessons and learn from those lessons, even if I'm not doing the thing. And even if my goal isn't to, at some point, do a monthly Marvel or DC book, which I'd be very grateful to do, but I wouldn't want to do it if it was going to cost me my health and sanity. I would love to work for them, for the big two, but from everything I hear, just that the deadlines are just so crushing. And yeah, I know it's super lazy, but I like sleep. And here's another thing. That line I just made, Herman, even if your hand is not that steady, I think that it's good practice to come in and just make simple, long lines. Like this line, I need a little bit of muscle in here, so I'm going to come in. Instead of trying to go and make a quick, sweeping line, I'm just going to come in and just very slowly. You can make big, bold lines and make them as slow strokes. And what you will find is that you can control, it takes time. You're not going to get this overnight, but you can control the stroke as you make it. But see, at this point, so much of the drawing is defined with these large areas of black that I honestly don't even need to do a lot. Really, I just need to finish her cowl, do the bat symbol, kind of do the shadows under her chin, and then add a little bit of detail in the hair. I don't really need a lot more. Let's see here. Dylan says ink bed of death. And he says, pretty chill, Paul. Let's see here. Oh, Paul got to go to the gym. I need to get some exercise in today. He says, good. Gym, lunch, chill for a bit with Jeremy on the stream. Always good to have you chilling in the house, Paul. Let's see here. Dylan mentions, I heard the new Storm comic is really good and that she's more powerful than the Phoenix Force. I need to. Ooh, Amar also says, yes, she is now the Eternal Storm. I need to check that out. I started this stream originally planning to draw Storm, and I wasn't even aware of the changes in the character that you're talking about. It was just, was one of the first, along with she and the Falcon were like the first two Black comic book characters that I encountered. Like I encountered them way before I encountered Black Panther. And so I was just like, let me start with them. But then when I was going through these sketch cards, I was like, oh, I have some unfinished pieces in here. So let me finish them. All right. But yeah, I'm going to check out what's up with the new Storm comics. Let's see. Skipping over some food talk that's actually making me hungry. I think I'm going to go have some leftover lasagna. I just realized now I look up and it's just after noon my time. And all I've had to eat today was some oatmeal. So when we finish up this stream, I'm going to go have me some lunch too. Dylan says, I forgot to include Leyendecker as inspiration. Let's see here. Okay, we're going into pizza talk. And I'm just gonna get hungrier if I if I get too caught up in that. Although Herman says I have a strict diet for certain food. It's the only reason, because I would eat pizza every day of my life. So I'm getting older, so I treat myself from time to time. Yeah, it is harder. Yeah, controlling my diet when I really just want to have like burgers and fries and pizza is tough. Let's see here. Paul says, I haven't been creating, Jeremy, hanging out in the chats. Well, that's true. I actually have not been keeping up with Instagram posts. So I'm not sure where you are with the children's book that you were working on. But I hope that's still coming along well. If not, you seem prolific enough that I wouldn't be surprised if you're like, oh, I'm done with it. Let's see here. Getting back to the artwork. Herman says, see, but if you mess up them inks, LOL, he says, I try to indicate, like block off huge spots for inks and figure out the direction and then add a little details with a smaller pen. Well, I am not afraid to just come in with some white. If I screw this up, I don't actually have any paint by me right now. But I have a bunch of brushes for inking, and why can't I get my fingers in here? My finger's fat. Let's see here. But I will this brush has white tape around the handle specifically so that I know not to put this in ink. This is for white paint. So if I do something where I like, for instance, I could come in here and I could clean up this line a little bit, have this come down a little bit. I'm probably not going to because it's just a sketch card. But if I were really anal about it, I certainly, because at a certain point, if you start inking stuff in and then going back out and painting stuff out with white, after a while, it becomes less of you're putting the blacks exactly where you want it, and it becomes more of a sculptural process. Adding and removing, you laying some stuff in and then pulling stuff out. And I find that to be a much more comfortable way to work. Yeah, I realized the downside is I don't have any of my corrective tools here. So yeah, if I did screw up, then yeah, that's it. It's screwed up. But I could fix it later. In fact, one of the reasons for getting back to doing traditional art is that I don't think I spend enough time learning how to fix mistakes. I think it's an excellent practice to make a mistake intentionally just so you learn how to fix it. You definitely learn, I think you learn a lot more by making mistakes and learning to fix them than figuring out how to make something perfect every time, because nothing is perfect. You're constantly going to mess up, and it's good to just move around and change stuff. Let's see here. Dylan says, I'm extremely picky with black and white art. I don't know why. It's one of the reasons why I love Mignola and Topi. Their artwork looks extremely great in black and white. You know who else I love in black and white is Sean Gordon Murphy. He's one of those guys that Matt Hollingsworth is one of the best colorists in comics. I think he colored most, if not all, of Preacher. He's colored so many great artists, and I think he tends to. I haven't checked recent stuff in recent years, but most of the stuff that I've read of Sean Gordon Murphy's that is in color, they usually hire Matt Hollingsworth to color his stuff. That said, while I love Hollingsworth's colors, Sean Gordon Murphy to me is one of the artists who he's like a manga artist. Like, it looks better in black and white. And I think that that's tough to come by. And it's something that I want to pursue and want to achieve. Although, if anything, I feel like my work is definitely going more in the direction of Alex Toth than it is a Sean Gordon Murphy. Let's see. Oh, and Chris says, what about Shelby Robinson? Yes, he says he's good too. I absolutely co-sign on that. I caught Shelby while he was working on a Body Bags piece the other day. Like, I know that he live streams, and I think he popped in on this stream one time a few months back. But I don't know him well, but I've definitely had really pleasant conversations and interactions with him at conventions, and he's a super cool guy. So it was like nice to actually, it was a very pleasant surprise to be able to catch him live. And I was watching him inking a Jason Pearson's Body Bags. He was working on a piece for them. I don't know if it was a commission or a piece of fan art. I presume it's a commission because man's busy, man is dope. And yes, he's a guy who his work, I think, looks better black and white than colored. I definitely would put him in that category. See here, Paul mentions Jeremy's little hand pointer looks like some debris on my iPad. Tried wiping it off. You know what's weird is that little hand pointer that you see, that is my mouse on my laptop. For some reason, when I do this, when I'm using my mouse now, it shows up on the screen of the camera, and I don't know why. Anyway, I'll try to keep it off to the side so it's less distracting. I get that when I take not Carl Altstetter, Carl Ganas, the figure drawing instructor. When I take his classes, sometimes he'll have a stylus. He'll be working with his stylus to move stuff around on his computer, and then he'll be drawing on his iPad, and the mouse will just be there on the screen next to where he's drawing, and he doesn't see it on the iPad, but I see it. It's driving me nuts. So let's see here. Mighty Geek Studios says Ty Templeton saw how Bruce Timm's style could be pulled off in comics. I mean, hell, animators have to move a lot faster than comic artists. So it makes complete sense. In fact, I kind of want to go back and read some more Ty Templeton comics. Now that we're talking about it, I'm getting a Jones for it. Right now, what I'm reading Tom King's Sheriff of Babylon. And I'm only like 3 issues in so far. And I don't know why I'm blanking on the artist. Because he's an artist that I really, really like. Somebody in the chat will shout it out. I mean, he's a frequent collaborator with Tom King. They've worked on multiple projects together. Let's see here. Dylan says, the X-Men movies were my introduction to Storm. I immediately fell in love with her. Haven't read any of her comics yet, but I've seen the videos of her history and stuff. Aquaman is my second fave. You know what's funny? I like Halle Berry as an actress, and I think they did a good job with her when they brought her back in the the more recent X-Men movies. That said, I always felt like Angela Bassett. I'm glad they got her in the Marvel movies eventually as as T'Challa's mom, the Queen in Black Panther. But she, I think, was what everyone pictured as Storm. Like they thought that an X-Men movie might have gotten made much sooner, and that she would have been Storm. In fact, I feel like Halle Berry kind of made Storm more of her own as, in the later, like in her later appearances. I feel like she wasn't necessarily allowed to be given the character arc that Storm deserves. Because Storm really, she ended up becoming leader of the X-Men. And I think that was one of the most interesting periods in the character's journey, when she stepped up and took on the reins of leadership. Let's see here. Herman says, what type of white paint do you use? Acrylic, gouache, or some type of whiteout? I never did that. That will be good to know. I use multiple kinds. What I mostly will use is just plain old Liquitex white acrylic paint. I have bought, or actually a friend, no, my buddy Carl Alstetter gave me some Deleter, the Japanese company that makes really great inks and brushes. And I think they also make Zipatone. He got me some Deleter white. I have tried Pro White, which is what they used, what comic artists specifically would use for either correction or for creating effects like rain and special effects in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Pro White was kind of the go-to, and I bought some. The thing is, Pro White, if you don't use it regularly, it really hardens in the jar, and it got to the point where I couldn't even get the jar open to get to the Pro White. By the way, what I'm doing right here is I am intentionally creating like a gradation. Like imagine if you were using Photoshop and you were just saying, I'm going to make a gradient from dark to light and then back to dark at the edge, except instead of doing a gradient of tone, it's a gradient of shapes of black and white. And it is tough to do with this brush pen because this brush pen is very wet. In fact, sometimes I'll take this, and the same way you would wipe off a brush before making a line, I'll go in here. Let me get that off the screen for a second. I will go in here and I will just pull a little bit off of the brush, because this brush pen, it's designed for water. It's for watercolor. And the sets where you fill this with water and then you use this brush on watercolor. That's what this is. It's an aqua brush. Now, because of that, it flows. Like the flow is ridiculous. It just flows. Ink just pours out of this thing. So you have to be kind of judicious in using it. It definitely encourages you to use a light touch. Now, see, I may have gone a little overboard in this area with the hair, made it a bit messy. This is one of those things where I would probably come back in with some white paint and paint that out. Now, I might paint it out and paint the whole thing again, or I would paint it out, just paint into it and paint the areas that I do want. You know what I should do is I should look at some Terry Austin. When I think about, badass inkers, It's Terry Austin and Klaus Janson. Although I really like Jonathan Glapion too. I didn't read a ton of Spawn, but when I think of like modern inkers whose work I like his inks on Greg Capullo, I really feel are super buttery. Yeah, I went too far with this. Now, see, this is again in conversation with Herman. I probably went too far with this. Need to make corrections, but I think you learn a lot by painting stuff in, going too far, and then needing to come back out. Yeah, so anyway, Liquitex, white, fluid acrylics. I also will frequently just use plain old Pentel whiteout pens. They're called Presto correction pens. Like a little blue, as opposed to like a long stick, it's kind of like a short, fat, chunky marker. They look kind of like paint pens. So those are the things that I use. Just plain old acrylic, Liquitex acrylic whites. Like I said, Pro White is what was recommended when I first was like studying comic creators and what they used for inking. But I found for me, I didn't use it regularly enough. And when I did, so that when I needed it, the jar was like sealed shut. It was kind of hard for me to use. Wow, I just inked my fingers. All right, let me get caught up here on the chat because we're already at an hour 20, and I probably should wrap up soon because I've got stuff to take care of today. All right, so it's just going to be all chat all the time. I'll leave the picture up here in case anybody has any more ink or art questions. Well, let me just focus on the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. So Dylan says I'll have to look into to Murphy, Sean Gordon Murphy. Yeah, he's definitely worth looking into. He did the White Knight series where the Joker is kind of the hero and Batman's a villain. He created like a whole White Knight universe for DC Comics. He has a really great comic called Punk Rock Jesus that he wrote and drew. I've not read any of the Zorro book that he did, but he ran a really successful Kickstarter campaign where he basically went to the owners of the estate and licensed the right to do the Zorro comic, and it's like, I'm doing my own Zorro comic. So that's pretty badass. It's here. Herman says, since college, I've been drawing with my writing black pen since art and literature since 2002. I barely use pencil, but I need to use pencil again when I'm doing traditional work. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, the whole idea of needing to do something, I am guilty of drawing a box around myself in terms of what I have to, what tools I should or should not use and why. By the way, speaking of which, when you mentioned going in with a micron, I know I said I was going to stop drawing, but when you mentioned going in with a micron, see, the nice thing is that if everything else in this piece is drawn with a micron, it's going to give it so much more distinction in comparison to the line art that's currently on here. because I was sitting here and I'm thinking, I should probably go in. In fact, the big mistake I made is I actually should not have drawn any of that hair with the brush, which is weird because brush, hair is made to be inked with a brush. It just is. But given how small this piece is, trying to ink that hair with a brush on a figure, maybe if it was a tighter shot where it wasn't her head and torso, but if it was just a close-up of her face, then maybe it might have been a good idea. But for something this small, the brush just is too chunky of a tool to use. There we go. Pretty, but not sultry. It's not the Catwoman eyes. You know who I really love right now is Chris Samnee. I know I was talking about Alex Toth, and Chris Samnee to me is like, he is the modern day Alex Toth. Like, his storytelling is excellent, his draftsmanship is excellent. He for me is like the complete package as a comic creator. Incredible art, incredible storytelling. What I would call an artist's artist. See, this is how you know somebody loves drawing. They specifically say, all right, I'm going to stop drawing, and then immediately goes back and starts drawing some more. All right. No, I know. We need to get to the end of this stream. Let me stop here. But by the way, for those of you who struggle with line weight consistency, switching back and forth between a micron and a brush or a brush pen. By the way, I label these things so I know what kind of ink is in each one, because I've experimented with a couple of different brands of ink. But if you were to do, like, say, the outline of a figure in your shadows with one tool and then do all your details with another tool, even if you were to flip it, if you were to reverse the usage and did this for the shadows and the outlines, it creates variety, because this is a more flexible line weight variable tool. You can come in and also give you nice thick lines, whereas this one is a consistent line and you can create thickness by building it up, but that difference alone creates a sense of detail by having a chunky line and then detailed lines. And also, by the way, a very good tip is really to use chunky lines for framing, and then use thin lines for where you want the eye to go. Meaning, to use thin lines, I really should have used it in all of everything inside of this area. Should have, if I thought about it, should have been done with a micron, simply because that would draw the eye here. Maybe the micron plus the bat suit here. Although I am going to go in and put in like a seam line down the front of her torso, as opposed to erasing that construction line. I'm just going to make that a seam in the suit, almost like a Joel Schumacher bat suit. All right. Let's see here. Dylan says, I haven't read Moon Knight, but I love the juxtaposition between colored and everything and Moon Knight being mostly all white. Yes, I do think that's a pretty powerful visual design. I think he's a great, well-designed character. I also love the Declan Shelby version where he's in the white, like, suit with the vest, the very classy Mr. Moon. And hey, Paul says, believe it or not, right now I'm reading Watchmen for the first time. Well, the good news is the movie doesn't spoil the ending. So enjoy. I'll be curious to hear what your thoughts of it are over time. Let's see here. I see Nibala Studio in the chat. Good to see you. Thanks for popping by. Thanks for the flames and the love. I feel the power. I feel it. Thank you. Yeah, Byron says, back to Storm Talk, says, it's crazy how well Angela Bassett's aged. She's still gorgeous. Yes. I mean, to be honest, I almost feel like, see, that's the thing. I feel like, even though it would be nice to have her play like, if they, like, assuming they have Old Man Logan, to have Angela Bassett play Old Woman Storm. But, and first off, you never want to call any woman old. You just don't. You don't want to call her old woman. But secondly, that's the thing. I like Halle Berry as an actress. I don't want to disrespect the work she did do as Storm. I'm not saying that she was miscast. I just don't feel like if they had gone, first off, I think Halle Berry, they needed to introduce, in the films, they needed to introduce her as classic Storm, but Halle Berry would make a great Mohawk Storm. That's the thing. She'd be like the punk rock Storm. That's, you know, where I see her. Like she just has more of the edge that I see. But yeah, Herman says, who's with the artist that draws Moon Knight, but his sketches or inks look like it was done in a rough brush or charcoal and gave it a more traditional look. I can't think of the artist though. Possibly, I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz definitely did a rough look. I'm not sure who else, because I really have not read, other than Declan Shelby, who had a very clean line. I love Bill Sienkiewicz, but I think I've read some of his early Moon Knights. That's it. Bill Sienkiewicz and Declan Shelby. That's the only Moon Knight I've ever read. I will tell you that I did dip into Greg Smallwood. I read like the first issue of his run, but that's only because I loved Greg Smallwood's Human Target artwork. And I wanted more of that. His Moon Knight stuff is excellent. It is not the same as Human Target. The Human Target really leans into classic 50s illustration, whereas his Moon Knight stuff is more traditional superhero, still great. Let's see here. Dylan says, I totally agree. Angela would be the perfect Storm. She has the queen goddess voice and the realness that Storm has. And good to see Scott. Good to see you, man. Says, I always thought David Bowie's wife, Iman, would have made a good Storm back in the day. I don't know how much acting she did, but she was in one of the Star Trek movies. You know what? That's a great pull. I can't remember how many movies I've seen Iman in. But I think that, yeah, she would. For a minute, I thought you were going to say David Bowie would have made a great Storm, and I was going to bust up. Let's see here. Paul says, I think Halle Berry is like 57 or 56 or 57. You know what? See, well, that's a good point. Halle Berry also, that's why I feel like going back to the Angela Bassettness of it all, as great as she would be, I just feel like I don't want to, I already said it before, I don't want to diss Halle Berry's run on her role. It's funny, I'm talking about her like a comic book artist, her run on Storm, because I just feel like they just never did. I don't think that they used Halle Berry's strengths in any of her movies as Storm. So it's not that she herself is a bad Storm, because she's a great actress. Let's see here. Dylan says, in terms of Iman, I had to look her up, Scott, but I can see that. And by the way, thank you for dropping in, Scott. It's good to see you, man, as always. Paul says, Iman is so beautiful. She's surreal. Let's see here. Dylan says, close, Paul, 58. So let's see here. All right. I gotta get caught up on these chats here. Dylan says, I love how the black is shaped by her cape. Gives it visual interest. Well, that was one of the things. Part of the reason for me drawing this is because I was not happy with this sketch card. And this one, it's a perfectly fine drawing, but I felt like it lacked composition. Like it's just a headshot and nothing else. And I think that this choice of framing her and using the wings as the frame, that's what goes from just an illustration to a composition. It is making choices like that. And a lot of the times it's not, oh, I'm going into this with some sort of like level of deep knowledge. It's more of just looking at the drawing and then being able to analyze on the fly and say, what is this missing? What's wrong? What does it need? Because originally I was planning to color in all of the cape area in yellow, framing her that way on the underneath. But I realized that if I add a compositional device to frame it, it doesn't really need that. And as I was thinking about her as a whole silhouette, I started thinking, well, if I frame her upper body, then I don't need to necessarily frame all of the black that's in here. So, but yes, thank you for that compliment, Dylan. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Paul as well. He says that card looks bad. As bad as in good. So thank you. And James says, I enjoyed Punk Rock Jesus. Yeah, that's still, I haven't read enough of Sean Gordon Murphy's work because, I've read some of the White Knight stuff. And then I've read a few things. Well, there's stuff that I still want to read that he has done with other creators. Like I haven't read Tokyo Ghost yet. That's on my list. Oh yeah. Herman says Sean Murphy's amazing. That's my go-to for trying to somewhat mimic. That's a good one to pull from. That he's definitely. He has a big influence on me as well. Oh yeah, Dylan says, "Ooh, he's the guy behind Punk Rock Jesus." I've been wanting to read that. Well, definitely. I think multiple people on the stream have recommended, so go for it. Definitely check it out. And Paul, you're an art enabler, which is a good thing to be. But he's like, keep drawing. Oh yeah. Amar says, what was up with the Storm tease drawing? Was that something you were about to work on? Yes. So on Patreon and on the Discord server, I had posted the start of a drawing. In fact, let me grab it real quick. I'll throw it on here. Oh. Where is... all right, psych. So I don't have it. I boxed up. By the way, I'm moving again. So I boxed up my the sketchbook that I actually did the sketch in. But I did a sketch of classic Storm's headdress, and I'd started sketching it, and I thought, you can kind of tell that who it is just by the fact that it's a headdress and the shape of a female head. And so I posted, guess who this is? So that's what Amar is referring to, is like, what was up with the tease? I was going to work on a Storm piece in this live stream. And then when I opened up, I have like a whole bunch of sketch cards that I've done over the past few months. And I had intended to do a Storm sketch card this session. And then I sat down, I found this unfinished piece, and I just decided to finish this. So yes, I guess next week I'll probably draw the Storm one. But that's what's up with that. And Dylan asks, what are your thoughts on grayscale art? I'm more picky about it than black and white. Usually, to me, looks too muddy. I am a huge proponent of grayscale art. I think that it feels more like a painting. I mean, when I look at manga, I see it where it's, usually it'll be black and white character art with like a nice grayscale gradient in the background. Or they'll have it where the frame, the background is black and white, and the character art has a nice gray tone scale to it. I think it's a great visual device. I think it looks really, really cool. I think that I may experiment with, like, for instance, let's say I were to draw this again, and I were to come in and say, instead of, like, let's say I've got the black up here framing her, and then I've got the white framing that. Imagine if her entire silhouette was just a wash where I started with black down here, and then just used a watercolor, just a black and white wash going all the way up, and then let that dry, and then draw the inks in on top of that. So like pencil in the figure, then do the wash, then come in and ink on top. I really do love, I mean, I think you guys obviously know I'm pretty schizophrenic in terms of my artistic tastes at this point. If you ask me what my opinions are of any given medium or technique, I'm going to say I like it. Because I think one of the things that's hardest for me as an artist is picking one thing and sticking with it, because I love the allure of all kinds of art tools, all kinds of devices. The only thing that stops me from just making everything and doing nothing but experimenting is that I need to finish things eventually. So, I mean, I've come down on the level of preferring black and white work to color, because color to me is a whole nother language to learn. And then digitally working with Procreate. Those are kind of like where I've landed in terms of my bare bone tools. But I love everything. I love different tools. I love that they all have different effects. So when you ask, like, what are my thoughts on grayscale art? To me, it's another seasoning on the spice rack of comics. Let's see here. Paul says, I did my last book in grayscale and I don't like it. Gonna try my next strictly black and white. Well, see, here's an interesting thing. When I was doing, so my first book, Eye of the Gods. When I originally did this book, I did it with so it's black and white. It's grayscale, line art plus black and white. But part of the reason for that is because in the sequences when the character is having visions, the line art is intentionally like blurry. Like I went through, and people actually, I've had people at conventions trying to look at it, and they would like hold the book away from them. Like, is something wrong with my eyes? But it's like a weird, like here's one of the dream sequences. So it's like a weird, blurry dream sequence effect whenever he's having visions. But that's because I wanted it to very clearly look different when he's having a vision than when he's having than just normal scenes. Now, when I went and I did Morningstar, I intentionally, the first 3 issues did not have gray tones. So all the gray tones that you see in these scenes, in these sequences, this was all added after the fact. The reason for that is because there's one issue in the middle of the series, issue 4. In issue 4, the book goes back and forth between the present, when the angels are all sort of celebrating having had like a battle with the defeating the devils that are kind of been fighting and pursuing the angels of heaven and kind of like trying to destroy them. It goes back and forth between the victory and then the battle itself and what led up to it. And so for the battle itself, I used sort of that blurry flashback tone that I was doing. I needed to find a way to visually separate the present from the flashback. And that's why I realized I needed gray tones for this issue. And once I did that, then I said, all right, well, now I've got to go back and gray tone all of the issues previous. Excuse me. And the rest of the series. I started by trying to do what you said, Paul, where I was going to do the whole thing just in black and white. But I've come to realize that my mind thinks in gray tones. It doesn't think in color. It doesn't think in black and white. It makes more sense for me to do something in gray tone, to the point where I'm going to start doing books where I start with gray, like to basically have the page be mostly gray and use black and then white to focus people's attention. So imagine if you're just reading a whole comic, and if it's got like 6 panels, only one panel is white or has white in terms of the frame. The rest of them are going to be like light grays or dark grays. Maybe there might be one black panel. But I want to start leaning more, even deeper into grays. Let's see here. Paul says, I think I overdid it with the grayscale. You need to be judicious with it. Well, I got to tell you, watching Detective Perez as you were putting it out online, I really do feel like, I think you're being too hard on yourself. And think pot in the kettle, man. I can't tell you to be easy on yourself, and I'm hard as hell on myself. But I think you may come back to it a few years from now and you'll be a little kinder to that book, because I think it looks great. I think you just need some distance from it. That said, I mean, hey, try doing it all in black and white. See how it goes. Dylan says, I want to get into manga more. I'm loving Kaiju number 8. But like I said, I'm not really a fan of grayscale, so it's a bummer that most manga is grayscale. Well, I mean, you can find there's comics that are manga style that are in color. And also, I think you would actually have to do an active search to find manga that is printed in color. But Masamune Shiro, the guy who did Ghost in the Shell and Appleseed, in Ghost in the Shell, and I want to say maybe even in Orion, there was always he would have the first 4 or 6 pages of each issue would be in color, and they'd be like a nice watercolor look to them. Hell, I don't know if they have made any color comics of Miyazaki, but obviously Miyazaki, when you look at the color palettes and the work of all of his films, he does very beautiful color work. I wonder if there's a color version of, say, Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, because I haven't read that one, and I know it was originally black and white, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was color. Let's see here. Paul says, live and learn, Dylan. Well, plus, I don't know. I know that when I say my favorite stuff does tend to be black and white. For instance, John Byrne, fantastic artist that he is, I came across, as I was boxing up some comics, I came across his DC OMAC miniseries, which is all black and white. And I will tell you that it made me want to read all of John Byrne's comics in black and white. There was something about it that just really hummed and singed. I liked it without the color. I still like color comics. But some people have an affinity for, some people refuse to read a comic if it's black and white. I understand that, but black and white is what I dig. I dig them both. I love them both. It's not a either or. They're just different flavors. Chris says, thick on the outside edge, thin for the inside. Yeah, in terms of the line work. That's definitely, if I had one thing, we were talking about me screwing up earlier. If there's one thing I would have to do over again, it's everything that is inside of this silhouette. Okay, the neck would also still be a solid shoulder, but all of the face and all of the hairlines I would have done with microns, specifically because even though hair works better with the brush, it would create better contrast in terms of the overall figure if I had done it with a micron. So here, Paul says, mine would have worked better too if I had limited it to 1 or 2 grays, then used Zipatone and cross-hatching. Yeah, it is a challenge to find a nice balance in terms of over rendering. But over rendering is not necessarily the same as just eliminating gray tones altogether. Let's see here. Herman says to Paul, have you ever made a sphere of value scheme to determine your lighting? I think that would help so you don't overdo it. And Paul says 100%. Let's see here. Then Dylan was asking how many grays Paul used, and he says 4 or 5. Got muddled like you mentioned. And then Dylan says, I could see Barry being a good punk storm. Yes, very much so. Let's see here. So Chris says, is this the popular thing to do quickly, work on sketch cards, maybe up your skills? The thing about doing sketch cards, this is a recommendation to me from my friend Carl Altstetter. So when I do comic conventions, which I only have one convention on the books this year, which is WonderCon in Anaheim. But when I do conventions, I usually sell very little, if at all none, of original art. Generally speaking, I mostly sell my graphic novels and art prints. And Carl, but the fact of the matter is that the artists, I think, that make the most money at conventions, usually it's the ones who are doing commissions. They fill their commission list, and they're taking commissions on the spot. While I don't want to take commissions on the spot because it makes it really hard for me to talk to people at the show if I have my head down, I'm drawing, I did want to bring some more original art to the show this year. So Carl recommended do some sketch cards. Hence this whole stack. That's the whole point of this. This is me loading up with work to bring to WonderCon. That said, I'm also probably going to do some larger. I don't have the pad in front of me, but they're probably this is an 8. This trade is over here. This trade is 8.5 by 5.5 by 8.5. So I've got some 9x6 boards that I'm probably going to do some larger pieces on, about the same level of detail. Busts, half figures, that sort of thing. So yes, I will say that it is an exercise to help your skills in terms of finishing work because it's a small piece. It's low stakes. You see how long I'll work on an illustration for months and months. You saw how long it took me in one live stream to get this mostly done. So yeah, I think that it is good, even though I was doing it for financial reasons. I think it's a good exercise to just get in the habit of trying to make finished small pieces, just to experiment. Because if you screw it up, the consequences are low. I spent an hour and a half on this. I'm not going to tear it up, but if I were to just tear it up, I could just make another one. And I actually think that that's a good idea for any medium you want to try. If you want to try painting, you want to try watercolor, don't make a big ass elaborate watercolor. Make a small ass sketch card size painting of just a head, a face, or whatever. And make a bunch of small pieces. That way you've got room to screw up. Like even with these, I told you, I'm not, out of these Wonder Woman cards, they're only this first one is the only one that I'm happy with the face on. And, the rest of them, I'm not happy with the face or the hair. This one, I'm happy with the face on, but I still don't feel like her hair, this was me just drawing hair that I thought was interesting. This character has a nice face. It has a better face than these other ones, but it's not Wonder Woman's face. It just looks better than the other ones. I still need to figure out how to draw my Wonder Woman. And that's the point of doing these small pieces, is that you can just do a bunch and experiment and try. Now, this Wolverine came out very well, but why? Because I spent all of my high school years drawing Wolverine over and over again. If I were going to work on one Marvel comic, it would probably be Wolverine, because he's the character that I've drawn the most. But that's the other thing. We talked earlier about drawing things that we're afraid of, cars, buildings. small sketch card of a car. Yes, cars have a lot of details, but drawing it this small will force you to cut it down to what are the most important aspects of the car. So yeah, working small allows you to make mistakes with a low level of consequence. So go ahead, make small pieces, screw them up intentionally. So let's see here. Chris says, just missing hands, legs, and feet like in bigger pieces. And that's an interesting idea. I could also, there is a hand in this Joker piece because it's like Joker as Wolverine mashup. And so it's got him with the gun. But what if I were to have made this so that the composition was just his face and his hand in it? You can still do a small piece and get a hand in there. In fact, it's funny. Remember, I had mentioned Marshall Rogers. Originally, I was planning to do some Batman work, and there was specifically I downloaded from my library Marshall Rogers' Legends of the Dark Knight. And there is a Batman panel in here. Let's see if I can zoom in so you can see this without, this shot would make a great sketch card. I was going to use this angle in this face, but I wasn't going to do it exactly with this hand. But this is a great way to get a hand into a sketch card. And hell, this is about the same size as if I put it over on this side. It's about the same size as the sketch card that I drew there. So, feet, okay, you can't get feet into it. It's not very interesting. Unless you're doing the Flash. Maybe that might be interesting. Let's see here. All right. We've really gone on way, way too long. See here. Chris says, I take it this is Catwoman. It's supposed to be Barbara Gordon. Batgirl. So I guess that's a fail on my part if it doesn't read as Barbara. But you know what? That's okay. I'm allowed to fail. I'm allowed to try stuff and do a nosedive, do a face plant. Not worried about it. Let's see here. Dylan says, I like that first card too. Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate that. Let's see here. Paul says this new card has a more dramatic pose with her head tilted up. Yeah, when I was comparing this card versus the previous one, that was the other thing. It's not just getting the composition, but also the fact of just, can I do something more interesting with her face or with her pose? Whereas this just felt very, very this was and that's the thing. This is the reason why I do thumbnails, is because every time I draw something, the first time I draw it, the first thing is usually not my best drawing. And I have to draw something over and over again before I get something that I really like. Herman says, I just realized my strength would be doing maybe cover work. I'm a bum in sequential art. This idea of just finishing a 24-page book, anxiety galore. Much respect to you, Jeremy. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. There are a lot of comic artists. The doing sequential work is really challenging, but it's what I find interesting. I've listened to interviews with people like Dave Johnson where, he still loves sequential work, but he definitely will admit that it's more work than he's interested in. And he likes just making really cool, single issues, which is why he's such a great single images, which is why he's such a great cover artist. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I wish I were better at covers than I am. In fact, at some point, I have it laying around somewhere, but I haven't finished it. I have a new cover that I've worked on it. You guys have seen me working on it in some of the older live streams, but I drew a new cover for volume 2 of Morningstar. I just have never finished it and put it out because I just was happier with something else. But that said, I was looking at that image recently, and I was like, hey, I need to go and adjust the colors on this. There's places where it's still off. Now, Dylan says storm card next week. Okay, that's the thing. I forgot to mention at the top of the stream. No live stream next week. Going to be busy with the move that I mentioned. So we're going to skip live stream next week, next Sunday, and I should be back the week after that. But yes, when I come back, we will get into we'll get into the storm sketch card. Chris says, I think grayscale is good for figure drawings and not necessarily comics. Well, I mean, it really just depends. For me, I do like grayscale. That's the thing. I like grayscale. I like black and white, and I like full color. For instance, From Hell. I've told this story before, but a couple of years ago, Eddie Campbell is going back and creating a color version of his and Alan Moore's Jack the Ripper comic From Hell. So I can't remember if Campbell is supervising the coloring or whether he's actually coloring it himself, but I want to say he's coloring it himself. I believe it's already done and out in the world. When they announced that they were going to be producing a color version, the first thing I did was I ran out. I had never read From Hell. It's just been on my list of stuff to read, much like Dylan with you and Punk Rock Jesus. I always been meaning to read From Hell. When I heard they were going to release a color version, I went out and I immediately bought the black and white version because I want to make sure that I can read it in black and white. Because let's say the color version just takes off and they stop printing the black and white version. I, as somebody who loves black and white art, wanted to make sure that I had a hold on that. All right, we're already at like 2 hours. Byron's like, you just love art, which is true. I can't stop. I'm a junkie on it. I'm going to try and burn through. In fact, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. Well, you know what? I think it does actually. You know what? I can sit this down. I realize I'm not drawing, but with this whole setup the way it is, I can turn around and face you guys completely, and the camera stays there. I don't have to keep turning to the side. So now I can get in 100% focus on this. I'm going to just burn through the comments, speed around, and we're going to wrap it up because we're already going 2 hours here, which I love you guys, and I would sit here all day with you if I didn't have other shit to do. So, yes, Byron says artists being hard on themselves. Never. Chris says, how'd you learn your cinematic artwork like in your comic book? I've read books on storyboarding. A lot of people dislike making comparisons between comic books and film and say comic books can do things that film cannot. That is 100% true. Comic books can take advantage of juxtaposition on the page. They can take, comparing different time periods, overlapping moments in time in a way that film cannot. That said, I am probably more influenced by film and animation storytelling and storyboarding. And I would say it's just, if anything, reading a lot of books on storyboarding and learning how to lead the eye from panel to panel to panel, from frame to frame to frame, creating shots that have a sense of continuity, that I think has absorbed into my comic book work, in that whether I move the camera up or down, left or right, changing their view, what I try to do is in every frame, I try to have one object that was in the previous frame. And it could be a character, an environment, or a physical object. Doesn't matter what it is. But I try to have one thing that was in the previous panel in the current panel, and I try to have one thing that's in the next panel set up and sometimes I can only do one or the other, the setup for the next panel or something from the previous panel. If I could do both, that's magic. But the idea is that as you move through the page visually, if you have moved around, if you've changed an angle, even if it's a dramatic change, even if you break the 180-degree rule, which is flipping the camera so it's facing now the opposite, even if you do that, you can do that, even though it's a rule. But if you have physical objects that explain where the viewer is geographically in relationship to the previous shot, your viewer should not get lost. You should be able to lead them through by giving them breadcrumbs. And the idea is that these breadcrumbs are not something where they have to sit there and say, oh, this is what I'm facing now. It should be subconscious. They shouldn't even realize it. They should just be able to keep reading, and all of the information for them to understand what they're looking at now as they go from panel to panel should just be there, and they don't think about it and they just keep reading. You want to be invisible as the storyteller. Or at least that's my approach to it. Now, mind you, I'm also heavily influenced by very design-oriented creators who do things that only work on the full page. You couldn't even do it in digital comics. Off the top of my mind, the top two I think of are three. Howard Chaykin, Walt Simonson, and then for a more modern, J.H. Williams. All people whose work influences me, whose work I highly respect. I don't tell stories the way that they do. I would say, if anything, I'm probably most influenced by Chaykin, but I don't design the page. I don't take advantage of designing the page the way that Chaykin does. And that's not that I don't want to. It's more of a choice. I think part of it's the fact that I'm leaning more into digital distribution these days and trying to find ways to make comics. Honestly, I'm leaning into trying to figure out how to make what I do on comics work on the phone. Because I do feel like comics, I prefer printed comics, but I read more digital now because I don't have space for any more comics. But I do feel like comics need to go to where the reader is. If people aren't reading books, if they aren't reading print books regularly and they're on the phone, I'm not saying I need to be on Webtoons, but I do need to find a way to make my work accessible on phones, on mobile devices. And that's a conscious choice. I can respect someone who is hardcore and says, I'm only doing my books in print, and I'm going to take advantage of the printed page and all of its magic. I think that there is power in standing firm on that. And there's things that you will do that digital comics will never be able to do. I think that I'd rather reach more people who might not necessarily pick up a print book, but if someone has if there's a cool sequence of my comics that are online and someone forwards it to them, I'd rather that happen. So my next book, I'm trying to figure out how to make it work as a webcomic. That's a very long answer. I thought I was going to do lightning round. I said I was going to do speed round. Liar. Okay. Byron, in terms of most black and white grayscale comic, I'm mostly black and white and grayscale in terms of how my brain thinks. It just makes more sense than color for me. Gary, also, my comic is 99% black and white. I use grays for a single book in one specific setting, and it actually still kind of annoys me. I should have forgot how to do it in black and white. That is a very me thing I feel the same way. By the way, I realized when I mentioned that in Morningstar that I needed the gray tones, I actually didn't need the gray tones. I could have just dropped the opacity of my line art and blurred it slightly, and that would have been enough to make the past and the present work without necessarily having the gray tones. That said, I do enjoy working with gray tones, but I get you in terms of wanting to be a purist in that sense. You know what? Okay, this to me is the best example of gray tones. Who here has read James O'Barr's The Crow? I'm going to keep going through the answers, but hopefully by the time I get to the bottom, by the time you get there, by the time people have jumped in and shouted out their answer. James says, I think of them as black and white movies. Plus, I've seen so many that I don't mind black and white comics. Plus, black and white works for noir comics. All of the above. I completely agree there. In fact, I've been wanting to go back and watch more black and white films. Like I was doing a frame study from Alfred Hitchcock's The Lodger, and the character design there is so cool. Like he looks like the Shadow without the guns. And that's something where the movie looks so badass and creepy. I want to go back and check that out. Byron says, yeah, I grew up with black and white indie comics and manga primarily. So to me, black and white is just more natural. And Chris says, so you cut Bristol board to get a sketch card. You can, you don't need to. Let me see. So these come pre-cut. So this is Strathmore. They make the Bristol board that I use for when I'm drawing comics. But these are artists' cards. They are 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So you could just take a sheet of Bristol board and cut it down to 2.5 by 3.5. You don't have to, you don't have to buy the prepackaged cards. I did it because I also bought I bought some from Strathmore. I bought some from a few different companies I found online, and then I bought some that are just plain cards, but the surface was too slick. So I may use them actually for painting. I may just gesso them or prime them with some acrylic white and then paint on top of them, make some painted cards. But yeah, you don't have to buy prepackaged cards. Let's see here. Byron says it definitely looks like Batgirl. I appreciate that. I could definitely see a world in which it looks like, if you just don't see the bat symbol, you might think that it's Catwoman, because it does. The ears do kind of fit. So I could see that. In fact, it might be interesting to do a Batgirl Catwoman piece, maybe a mashup. We'll have to see. Byron, you're another enabler, just like Paul. You're like, another 2 hours won't hurt you. All right. So Herman says, all right, peeps, have a good one. And Byron says, Jeremy and Speed don't get along. See, that's the thing. I get so caught up in talking to you guys. Again, the chat. You guys are awesome. I love hanging out with you guys. I really do feel lucky. I know so many artists that feel isolated and don't have a creative community and don't have other people to talk to. So you guys hanging out, popping up in the chat, and being able to talk with like my art friends, my art buddies, I don't feel alone and isolated the way a lot of artists do. It means a lot to me, and I mean it from the heart to like have all you guys and to be able to talk with you and share in this communal art experience, just discussing our processes, our influences, or our likes and don't likes, and just being able to like have that studio talk with you guys. That really, really does mean a lot to me. And yeah, that's the reason why I'm like, I'll go on and on and on, because it's kind of like, I know that I need to stop, but I kind of don't. It's like leaving a party before it starts to wind down. Like, it's one thing to do like kind of an Irish exit and just kind of disappear, like you're kind of dope and cool. But this is like leaving while the party is still raging, because we could definitely keep the party going. But the rest of the world beckons. Life beckons. Byron says, I'd be more surprised if people haven't read The Crow. Dylan says, I have 2 packs of those artist trading cards. I was going to use them to test out Oracle card ideas. Go for it. Do it. I am always in favor of, that's the main thing. I probably experiment more than I should, but I encourage experimentation because I feel like a lot of people put artificial rules and barriers in front of themselves and they don't experiment. So definitely test out Oracle card ideas. Dylan says, I haven't read The Crow, Byron. And I will say, first off, it's a very, very violent book. For anyone who feels that violence in their their media is triggering, you need to go into it forewarned. It's a very intense book. But I think that what makes it one of my favorite comics of all time is that the violence is justified. The story isn't about violence. It's about rage at loss. The main character loses his loved one in a very horrific way. And it's senseless violence. I mean, I think people, if you're interested in The Crow, you've heard the story, James O'Barr lost a loved one in a car accident. And with the senseless violence, The Crow was his way of dealing with grief. And that comes across in the book, in that the level of violence in the book it is someone screaming for relief from the pain of loss. And it is a book in which I do not feel the violence, and it is very, very violent. I don't feel that any of it is gratuitous. It is earned and needed in that it's an expression of pain. So that's your homework. If you haven't read The Crow, go read The Crow. And I'll be curious, for those that are not fans of black and white or not fans of grayscale comics, I'm curious, if you read The Crow, how you feel about it, or how you feel about grayscale work afterwards. Because I think that for people who, I feel that any execution, any type of rendering can work. It's just a matter of how well it's used. So I would just curious to see if The Crow at all changes your opinion on grayscale work. I mean, for me, part of it is that I read it at a very early age. I read it when I was in high school. I remember the local comic shop they had the original like single issues of The Crows. It was coming out the Tundra kitchen sink ones. But I remember when that trade came out, I kept looking and be like, ooh, I got to get that someday. It's one of those books I just sort of heard about. And then finally one day I bought it and I just devoured it. And it was so enthralling and heartbreaking. It's a heartbreaking book, but it's beautiful. And I see Pin, the Pin Fool's Life in the chat. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, we're just wrapping it up. The stream has gone kind of long here. Usually I run for about an hour, but I got to wrap up here. But you know what? First off, thank you for joining me. If you're not subscribed, hit that like and subscribe button. I know everyone says that, but I would like you to definitely catch a stream at the beginning when we're going regularly. We're skipping next week, but usually it's every Sunday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So let's see here. Dylan says, between your lives, Gary's, the Artcaster, Joshua, Tyler Crooks, I'm good with feeling connected with other artists. Well, that's good company to be counted amongst. I'm glad that you definitely feel that sense of communication and community as well. And I guess thankfully, you know what, Pin will be joining us as well. Sub, thank you so much. And Dylan says the card looks good, by the way. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I'll show you. It still needs a little bit of refinement. So I'll show you guys the refined one when I'm back. Like I said, next week, moving. Week after that, we should be back to our regular schedule. So on that note, I'm going to go back to the big screen here, and I will tell you guys that if you enjoy these live streams, we'd like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month. You can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. It's extra tiers for extra rewards, but $2 a month gets you in. So head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital comic, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at Substack. Head over to substack.com/@Jeremy. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, we're free digitally on Kindle. You can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It is a retelling of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. So it's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion, issues 5 through 8. Both have extensive back matter, character designs, script excerpts, thumbnails, page layouts, and more. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, you scroll down to flip throughs, you can find book flip throughs, see what's inside the books before you pick them up. All right. Oh, and Pin, thank you so much. Says that is real cool looking. Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, hell, check out the book flip throughs. You can see what's inside there. I don't give a narrative flip through. I just flip through the pages so you can see what's inside. But hell, you can watch pretty much the whole series being. If you go back into the back catalog of all the videos I have, you can pretty much watch the entire series being drawn over the course of, what is it, like, I would say like a decade now. I mean, my channel is 15 years old, but I think, yeah, you can watch pretty much the whole series being done. I think one of the earliest videos I have is me starting to work on the first issue of Morningstar. So, all right, and all right, guys, and Dylan, thank you. Dylan says I just subscribed to your Substack, Jeremy. Good. Well, I'll see you over there. All right, guys, that's it for now. Go be creative.